Welcome to Get Respect, subtitled How to Be Assertive, Get More of What You Want Without Being a Jerk. Hi, I'm Stephen and I'm a writer, filmmaker and podcaster with Evil Sheep Productions, where me and my daughter make small creative projects together. But in my day job, I'm also a behavioural change coach, where I work with individuals and businesses to help them improve what they do and how they do it. My qualifications include a degree in psychology, a master's in organisational psychology. I've got some postgraduate certificates in coaching and learning and development. But I've also worked for over 20 years in different learning and development roles in different sorts of industries. So today I'm talking to you particularly if you're a creative. That could include lots of different areas, lots of different skills, lots of different types of creative activity. So I've trained thousands of people in assertiveness techniques over the years. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of the people that you're dealing with, so a lot of senior people within the industry, will have had an experience of going through the type of training courses that I've delivered. So whilst I may not have delivered training to them specifically, things around how to negotiate and how to be assertive and so on, they're likely to have experienced some of that training. So if you've not, then I would say you're at a bit of a disadvantage. So as a creative, you're putting yourself out there all the time. Your art is an expression of you, who you are, and you just put it out there and you're kind of vulnerable to what people think about it. But it's also more than that, because as a creative, you're often involved in things like getting your foot in the door, to be noticed by somebody, to do an audition, to present your work in a very specific way. You might want to try and get funding. All of these things require you to have relationships and to have opportunities of communication between you and people that are often quite powerful within the industry. And so this power question is quite important. Whenever you're a creative approaching an institution or a funding agent or a funder, then in a way you've got an unequal power dynamic there. Or if you're talking to a studio, or if you're working with another large entity, it sometimes feels that it's quite unequal. You don't have any power. You know that you really want to get this thing out there, you want people to see it, but it feels like often you don't really have all of the cards. And that's just, I guess, the way that things are within the industry. But this unequal power relationship can make you feel quite hesitant and can actually make us behave in a way that doesn't necessarily give us the best chance of getting more of what we want. Also, as a creative, maybe a lot of what you do now is online. So this is a whole new branch of creativity, I suppose. A lot of people are literally, that's their art, is stuff that they do on YouTube or Instagram or Twitter or other platforms like that. And so that's part of how you're getting your art out there. Now, that means that lots of people are going to interact with you and with your art, and that can sometimes be quite difficult. It's not the most polite necessarily of formats. So how do you sort of deal with all of that? So that's part of this picture as well. So I want to talk to you as a creative and apply the principles that I've been using for many years with my learners, how you can use assertive behaviour to help you to get more of what you want more of the time. So before we start, I'd like you just to grab a piece of paper or grab a notepad, just pause the video for a moment and just jot down the answers to these three questions. They're all kind of related. First question is, what do you want? Now that's purposely very broad. So what do I mean, what do you want? Well, what do you want? What do you want out of your career? What do you want out of your life? Or we could just boil it down to a very specific situation that you find yourself in. What do you want out of that interview? What do you want out of that funding application? What do you want out of this mentor relationship? So have a think about what is it that you actually want. Now you can take that any way you want to. Just think about answering that question in any way that makes sense to you. So what is it that you want? And this is going to help you later when you come to goal setting. So knowing what it is that you want is part of the goal setting process. And the second question and the third question, kind of two sides of the same coin really. What do you want more of? What do you want more of? And what do you want less of? So these are all very much related. So what do you actually want? What are your goals? What are you trying to achieve? What will make you happy? And what do you want more of and what do you want less of? So just jot those down. We won't use those straight away, but we will come back to that a bit later on. All right, so primarily this course is going to introduce you to the concept of assertiveness. So it may well be that you think you know what assertiveness is, but in my experience, many people mix it up with aggressive behaviour. So I really want to focus on what assertiveness is as opposed to aggressive behaviour or dominating somebody. Now, there are two definitions that I use in my assertiveness programs. The first one is quite a standard one, and the second one is one that I've developed, which is a bit more specific. So, assertiveness is a way of behaving that makes sure you get attention and respect. Let's just repeat that. Assertive behaviour is a way of behaving that makes sure you get attention and respect. That doesn't really get into the nuts and bolts of it. We're going to do that later, but it just gives us the idea of what the outcomes are going to be. We're going to end up with some respect and we're going to end up with some attention. People are going to notice us. That's the first one. The second definition is one that I've developed over the years, and it's a bit more wordy, but it's because it encompasses a bit more specific stuff in it, really. It's also a way of behaving that gives us the best chance of getting more of what we want or need from a situation, whilst at the same time maintaining a good working relationship with the other person or with other people. So I know it's quite wordy, but it's important because it encompasses a lot. So first of all, let's break it down. First of all, it's a way of behaving that gives you the best chance of getting the outcome you want. Notice it's not a guarantee. Assertive behaviour is not a guarantee to get everything you want, but it gives you the best chance of getting what you want while maintaining a good working relationship with the other person. So in a way, it assumes that you want to maintain that good working relationship. So it's not about steamrolling over somebody. It's about maintaining a good working relationship, which means you can work with them again, and also you don't get reputational damage. More of that later. So you get more of what you want, but not at the cost of the relationships that you need. So coming up next, as they say, we're going to look at alternatives to assertive behaviour, the natural behaviours if you like, and we're going to include aggressive behaviour, passive behaviour and passive aggressive. We'll also then start to get really into detail about what assertiveness is, and I'm going to introduce you to 6 things that you can do to be more assertive. But just before we do that, I wanted to make you aware of how you can get your questions answered about how to get respect, be assertive, get more of what you want and need without being a jerk. What Should I Think About is my weekly podcast where my daughter and I have the ambitious goal of trying to make sense out of this contradictory, complicated and confusing thing we call the world. And the first Monday of every month, I look at your questions about assertiveness and how you can be more assertive in everyday situations. So just reach out to me at StevelSheep on Twitter. Let me have your question, and don't forget to subscribe to the What Should I Think About podcast. New episodes every Monday. Right, okay, let's get back to it then. So, reminder, what is assertiveness? Well, 2 definitions. It's a way of behaving that makes sure you get attention and respect, and it's a way of behaving that gives you the best chance of getting a positive outcome for yourself whilst maintaining a good working relationship with others. So what are the alternatives to assertive behaviour? Well, these are the behaviours that we kind of do just naturally. So these are aggressive behaviour, passive behaviour and passive aggressive. So let's have a look at these first. So passive behaviour is a way of behaving that means that your needs, wants and rights are either ignored or undervalued. So when we're behaving passively, here are some tendencies. In other words, things that we're likely to do. So passive behaviour is when we're unwilling to stand up for what we believe, or we're unwilling to say what we need or want. Maybe we fear conflict, and our want to be liked overrides that need to be respected. So a piece of passive behaviour would be We're asked what our fee is and we don't want to say it because we feel that we're not that good. We've already decided what our fee should be, but when somebody asks us what our fee is, we just don't want to say, we feel embarrassed. Or if somebody has said they didn't like what we did, instead of asking them to give you more information and find out why that was, you just sort of accept it because you don't want the conflict. We don't want to have any uncomfortable conversation because we just don't want conflict and we want to be liked. So that overrides the need for our needs and wants to be respected. So these are all tendencies of passive behaviour. So what I'd like to do now is just pause the video here and just jot down what you think are the consequences or are some possible consequences of passive behaviour. So when we're being passive, what are the outcomes that we can expect from that behaviour? Okay, so hopefully you've got some ideas there. So first that I've got down in my list is that on the good side, you tend not to make enemies. So people like you. They say what a nice person you are. But you fail to get respect. And ultimately what that means is that your views are maybe not valued as much as they should be. That your wants and needs are kind of ignored because people know you're not going to make a fuss. Therefore, they'll be okay. She'll be all right and he won't kick up a fuss. And ultimately, that means you get less of what you want or need from any given situation. Okay, so what is aggressive behaviour? Well, this is the one that people confuse with assertive behaviour. Aggressive behaviour is a sort of behaviour that tries to dominate the other person in order to get more of what they want or need. Now, sometimes this can be done in a very kind of strategic way, but other times it's just through somebody losing their temper. So these two different types of aggressive behaviour, or different reasons for it, if you like. Ultimately, though, it feels pretty much the same from the person receiving that aggressive behaviour. So it's a way of behaving that seeks to dominate the other person in order to get what they want. So here are some tendencies or some traits of aggressive behaviour. So don't forget, aggressive behaviour, the individual is trying to dominate the other person. So they might try to do that through intimidation or through threats, either physical threats or, again, in the workplace, more likely threats to damage your career or to damage your opportunity in some way. Bullying. And often aggressive behaviour is seen when the person loses personal control. So they start shouting and screaming. This is a demonstration of a lack of control. They're not actually controlling their behaviour, they're just losing their control. So they lack self-control. So I'd like to have a think again about what the consequences are of this type of behaviour. What are the consequences? Jot some of those down and then we'll see if we agree on some of those. Okay, so you might have a lot there, and obviously there are lots and lots of consequences for aggressive behaviour. So for me, one of the key ones is that people might fear you but not respect you. So remember what I said about assertiveness, which was a way of behaving that made sure you got attention and respect. Well, from attention and respect point of view, I think an aggressive person definitely gets attention, but they don't necessarily get respect. That's partially because they've lost control. So, that doesn't make you respect somebody when you see them completely lose control. So you may also find that people are reluctant to work with you. So it damages your reputation. It means that you're seen as somebody that's difficult, that you don't really want to have a lot to do with, because you're going to have problems with that person. Now at this point you might be thinking, there's loads of people like that I know in the industry. Well, that may be true. I guess when people get to a certain level, then they can get away with things. That doesn't necessarily mean, though, that it's helping them. Certainly, if we're working to make a name for ourselves, to become recognised and to get into areas where we're not currently, then reputational damage can just get in our way. Okay, so what is passive-aggressive behaviour? So sometimes people get this mixed up. They think that it's, when you're behaving passively and then eventually you lose control. Well, that's actually not passive aggressive. That's just being passive and then being aggressive. Passive aggressive is its own thing. So what is passive aggressive behaviour? So passive aggressive behaviour is a way of behaving that kind of undermines somebody. So it's aggression in a way without confrontation. It's trying to dominate without doing it overtly. So it's often about quietly undermining somebody. It could be through the use of sarcasm. You know, you kind of say something that's a bit cutting, but you do it in a kind of jokey way, but they know that you meant it, you know. Criticising somebody behind their back or undermining them in a very indirect way. It can be pretending to be a victim, doing it in a way that manipulates the other person. So there's lots of different ways of being passive aggressive, but essentially it's about being aggressive but in a indirect way. So again, what I'd like you to do is pause the video, jot down some outcomes, some consequences of behaving in a passive aggressive way. Okay, so here's some of my thoughts on that. So first of all, I think one of the most damaging bits of this is that you lose trust, or people lose trust in you. And that's quite poisonous, really. If you have a team that's got lots of passive aggressive stuff going on, then you have all sorts of trust issues. So it can be really poisonous. So passive aggressive is a very poisonous type of behaviour. Consequences are people soon sort of clock on to you. They realise that what they say to you doesn't always stay there, or you might use it against them. You don't really trust the individual, so it all becomes very poisonous and difficult. Again, similar to aggressive behaviour, it damages your reputation. It makes you difficult to work with, and that can affect how much of that sort of work that you get. All right, so I've touched on this already, but I just want to re-emphasise, because people get this wrong all the time. I see quotes on Twitter and so on all the time about, you know, getting this mixed up. What is aggression? What is assertiveness? So assertiveness is not aggression. Assertiveness is not aggression. It's not trying to dominate the other person. It's not the same as being outgoing or being extrovert, although it's fine if you are. It's not about being right all the time. It's not about never apologising. It's not about never admitting that you're wrong. It's not about manipulating the other person. And it's not about selfishness, only thinking about your own goals. What is it? Well, it's 6 things. Only 6, you say? Well, of course, you can cut these any way you want to, but these are 6 elements, if you like, that I like to highlight when I'm talking about assertiveness. And I've created them into a silly little acronym called ADISCO. So ADISCO, ADISCO, helps you remember the 6 elements to being assertive. So the A stands for adult to adult. The D stands for being direct and honest but polite. The I stands for using I statements. The S is about being solution oriented or solution focused. The C is calmly expressing ourselves, and the O is taking ownership of our own behaviour. So those are the 6 elements to being assertive. Let's have a look at them in more detail. So for the A, I'm going to draw upon Eric Berne's transactional analysis. Now this is not a deep dive into that in any way. If you're interested in that subject, then I recommend you buying Eric Berne's books. I think the first one he wrote was The Games People Play, or Games People Play. There's more modern takes on it and so on, but it's quite a detailed analysis of people's behaviour. Suffice to say that Eric Berne identified that communication could be described as a sort of transaction or transactions. So he described a transaction as the sort of base unit of communication. So let me give you an example. If you're sitting with me now and I want to know the time, I might say to you, "Hey, please can you tell me the time?" And you might reply to me, "Well, it's 2:15." So what we've just experienced there is a basic transaction. Please can you tell me the time? It's 2:15. is a simple transaction. Now, what Eric Berne identified is that at any moment we can adopt one of three, what he called ego states. And the fact that he calls them ego states shows its kind of heritage, if you like, from psychoanalysis. But just think about them as modes of thinking, if you like. So 3 ego states, 3 ways of being at any given moment when we are communicating. We could either be behaving from our adult, we could be behaving from our parent, or we could be behaving from our child. And at any given moment, the person we are communicating with will also be behaving from their adult, parent, or child. Here we have a situation where our adult, if that's on the left-hand side, that's us, our adult is talking to the other person's adult, whereas they're actually talking to us from their child to what they perceive as us being a parent. So straight away you should notice that because we've got sort of lines crossed here, we've got a problem. So let's just understand what we mean by these terms. So when we think about parent here, we're not really doing a full description of all the nuance of what being a parent is. We're just thinking about a parental or a parent ego state at any given moment. And you can think about a parent as either being nurturing or scolding, I suppose, telling somebody off, telling the child off. So sometimes a parent, you're being very nurturing, protective, and other times you might be correcting or scolding the child. So either one of those could be a parent type of ego state. On the other hand, you've got a child ego state, and as a child we can be a well-adjusted child or behaving in a well-adjusted way. So we can see there the example of the child offering something, so being a giving or a generous child. Or of course, or well behaved if you like. Or of course sometimes, as a child we can see bad behaviour, throwing a tantrum or rebelling. If you think about those ego states of parent and child, you can see how that might affect the way that the communication works. So the adult state, if you like, is more of a accounting, emotionally safe place for us to be. So one of the things that Eric Berne talked about was I'm okay, you're okay. So when we're talking from our adult to the other person's adult, we're essentially talking to them as an equal, and I'm feeling okay about the situation and you're feeling okay about the situation. So going back to our example again of telling the time, so can you tell me the time please? Yes, it's 2:15. That is an adult to adult piece of communication. If I said to you, can you tell me the time please, and you made a joke saying it's about time you got to watch, then that would be me talking to your adult, but actually what comes back is a child response. And that's when you start to get problems. So in my silly little example, nobody's going to get terribly upset about that. But you can see how the problem is if you're not coming from your adult and the other person isn't coming from their adult, you kind of don't get anything done. So Berne identified that when you're going to get things done, the best chance of getting things done is when you're coming from your adult, talking to their adult, and their adult talks to your adult. So what's the time please? It's time you had a watch means that we now have a kind of crossed wires situation. I expected an adult response, I got a child response. So what could I do about this situation? Well, I could go down to child, couldn't I? You're only saying that because you don't know how to tell the time. Or I could go into parent mode and start telling you off, Stop being so silly, I need the time. Stop behaving like a child. So now you're starting to feel that you're being told off by your parent. So you get the sense that the parent is trying to adjust, readjust, maybe dominate, but also sometimes protect. The child is all about being well adjusted, if you like, doing what they're told, or rebelling. These modes of communication are not particularly useful in the workplace or in any kind of commercial or adult situation. If you look on Twitter, you can see lots and lots of parent-child, child-to-child sort of transactions. The ones that work best are when you've got an adult talking to another adult. and you're able to talk rationally and reasonably with each other. When you're presented by a child response, how you then respond to that is very interesting. And this is an area that I don't think a lot of research has been done. I'd really like to see some more research on this. But my advice would be to stay in adult mode. So you're much more likely to get a good outcome for everybody. Don't forget, adult to adult is I'm okay, you're okay. Parent-child can be one person essentially scolding the other person. And from that comes all sorts of unwanted behaviours. So the simple takeaway message for the adult to adult part is to maintain your adult mode. No matter what the other person is doing, you maintain your adult ego state, your adult mode of behaving. What about the D? Direct and honest but polite. So this is very simple. It just means we communicate what it is that we want or need. We actually say it. What do we need? What do we want? What would be the good outcome that we're looking for? You might consider what your fallback position might be, but you're certainly going to communicate what it is that you want with the person you're talking to. So if somebody's offering you a contract and they ask you what's your rate, you tell them what you want as your rate. If somebody asks you how many weeks you need in order to prepare, you work out how many weeks you need to prepare and you ask for that. If you know this is part of a negotiation and this is your absolute minimum, then of course you may want to increase that a little bit to give you some negotiating space. This is not a negotiating course, I don't want to get into all of that. But ultimately my point is, be clear about what you want and make sure that the other person is clear about that too. If you agree, say you agree. If you disagree, say you disagree, but why you disagree. And of course, all the time doing this in an adult ego state. So you're always staying in adult mode. So that's really interesting. I actually don't see it that way. And here's why. Would be a way of disagreeing. Certainly in face-to-face communications, that's easier than over written communications, but you can still do it. So summarise. Say what it is you want. Say what it is you need. If you agree, agree. If you disagree, disagree, but politely and respectfully. Don't forget adult to adult communication. So next we're going to look at I statements, and this sits very nicely with being direct and honest, saying what you need or want. So when I deliver management courses, often this is about giving people direction. So, I need you to get that report to me by Friday. Thank you very much. I need you to have that information for me. I need you to give me this, or I need you to give me that. I need you to get back to me by such and such. So that's a very common way of giving somebody direction. It works very, very well, especially when you are the manager or the leader of a situation. I would like you to, again, very good in a leadership situation. I'd like you to have a look at this for me, please. I'd like you to make some changes to this. Thank you. Always putting in those pleases and thank yous, because that helps maintain that adult to adult relationship. If somebody says to you, well, when can you get this to me by? I can get this completed to you by such and such a date. So again, you're taking ownership. So the I really is about taking ownership of what it is you want or need, and you're willing to say it's something I would like. I would like this and I need that. So at first glance, that feels it's a bit all about me, isn't it? Well, no, because it is you that's asking for the thing or that needs that job doing or so on. So that's fine. You're taking ownership of what it is you need or you want. I was thinking about how this applies to creatives, and it got me thinking about how often creatives are expected to do things for free. Well, I can't pay you, but you're going to get a lot of good exposure by doing this. And of course, it's fine if you want to do something as a collaborative piece where nobody's getting paid, but it's just something that you want to do to get something out there. Okay, great. So long as everybody's part of that and nobody feels that they're being abused by that situation. But I think there's a real understanding that we shouldn't just be doing lots and lots of things for free. So if we're asked to do something for free, of course it's entirely your decision, but if you decide that no, actually you want to get paid, don't feel ashamed, don't feel bad about saying something like, oh, that sounds like a really interesting project, I'd love to get involved. I'll need to be paid this hourly rate or this daily rate. Or even, unfortunately, I'm not able to take this role without any payment. Now, of course, that could mean that you lose out on the opportunity to work with somebody or to do something that you'd be really interested in. So I'm not saying you should or you shouldn't do that. But if in your heart you know that you should be charging for something, but you're just not asking for it because you feel embarrassed or you don't want to do it, then that could be getting in your way as a professional trying to essentially make a living on your art. So it's important to think about how you do that. But of course, you do that in an assertive way. So it's not, this is typical. Who do you think you are? How am I supposed to live if I'm doing all this work for free? That might be how you feel, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what you say. You might say something like, that sounds really interesting, but I will need to be paid for it, because obviously I've got lots of expenses that I need to take care of. So just nice, polite, but very clear about what it is that you want and what it is that you need. Right, what's next? Well, we're up to the S of solution focused or solution oriented. So again, this is really getting down to our goal setting. What is it that we want? What is it that we need? In a way, if you don't know this, then you can't say it, can you? We said about say what it is that you want or need. Be direct and honest. Use I statements. I would like, I need, so and so. But you can't really do that unless you know what you want. So first rule, I guess, is know what it is that you want, which is why I asked you to do that bit of work at the beginning. So what are you trying to achieve? What is it that you want? Understand that first, and then everything else flows from that. How am I going to get more of that? What do I do in order to achieve that? What would be a good outcome? And then what could I do in order to get there? How can I improve? How can I do that better? How can I influence somebody, either directly or indirectly? So by that, I don't mean manipulating people, but if you're a leader, then sometimes you can give somebody an instruction to do something. Often, though, we're not in a leadership role. So then it's about influencing the other person. And again, the things I'm talking about in relation to assertiveness actually give you a better chance of getting what you want, maintaining that good working relationship so you can get more of it tomorrow. The other thing I should say about being solution focused that I talk about on my courses is, everybody likes a good moan, don't they? I definitely like a good moan. So yeah, fine. Moaning is cool. And if we get a good moaning partner, we can kind of moan to each other, and that's brilliant. But there is also a time, if we want to be achieving more of our goals, we've got to stop moaning and think about what we're going to do in order to change it. So that's quite a blunt message about being solution focused, but hopefully you take that in the right spirit. So yes, I think we all like to complain about things, but what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do in order to get more of what we want and need? So sometimes we just get tired and we just need to lower steam. Fine. But if we're going to get more of what we want and need, we're going to need to think about solutions. And that's what this message carries. Right, where are we up to? C stands for calmly expressing ourselves. So there's not a great deal to be said about this in terms of explaining what it is. I think everybody knows what it means to remain calm. Is it easy though? Well, of course not. Why? Because don't forget, it's not all about our rational thinking. We've got all these other things like our instincts, our fight and flight response, for instance, our traits that we've inherited from our parents, the things that have happened to us in the past that colours what we see and how we respond to things. So yeah, it's difficult. If somebody's rude to us, the natural response is to respond in kind, or maybe to just avoid them altogether. That doesn't necessarily mean that's the most effective way to behave in that situation. So it's not always easy to remain calm. And what I normally do at this stage is ask people to think about what are the strategies that they use in order to maintain their cool. So what are people doing to maintain their sense of I suppose, perspective and to remain calm in any given situation? Because as soon as we lose our calm or lose our cool, we start to lose our control, and those instinctive behaviours start to flood back in. And we're now at the mercy of thousands of years of evolution, and that's not necessarily the place we want to be. So remaining calm is really important. Answers I get back in terms of what they do, well, often people will think about taking a break, just removing themselves from the situation, grabbing a cup of coffee or something just to just get their mind off it for a moment, and then they can start to pick up that conversation again. So there's lots of strategies that we can use to lower our sense of anger or upset, but don't forget these are natural forces, so we can't necessarily control them in the moment. That's why I would say moving ourselves or removing ourselves from that situation at that moment might be a really effective way of maintaining our calm. Again, if we're thinking about social media, for instance, not tweeting angry. I used to say not emailing angry. Those are really good bits of advice. If you feel that's really got your goat, then okay, just have a rule. At that point, I am not going to respond to this. It just means that you whip up those feelings and something else is going to come back for definite. And there you go again. You're in a spiral. So yeah, that's the advice in relation to social media. Okay, so we're nearly there at the end of our 6 points, and the 6th point is ownership. Now, we've already talked about I statements, which are about taking ownership of what we need or want. So this is a different type of ownership. This is about taking ownership of our own behaviour. So what do I mean about taking ownership of our own behaviour? You could blame the person that's wound you up or got you upset. Well, it's your fault for pushing my buttons, And all of that might be true. We do have this inherited stuff. We do have these instincts. And yeah, people do push our buttons. So taking ownership, though, means, okay, I understand all that, but I've still got some agency. And I'm going to take ownership of what I do. Not with a view to beating ourselves up, but just to give us the power, the agency to make choices. As soon as we stop giving ourselves the power and agency to make choices, we've lost that power. We're now at the mercy of our genes or at the mercy of our instincts, and that's not a great place to be as a human. So taking ownership is again about standing up and saying, yeah, I'm the person that is responsible for my own behaviour, and you know what? I'm the one who's going to make sure that I do the things that give me the best chance of getting more of what I want. Okay, so there's the 6 points of being assertive. Time for a quiz. What are the 3 types of less useful behaviours that we discussed? What are the 3 types of less useful behaviours we discussed? What is the definition of the positive type of behaviour we discussed? In other words, assertiveness. What is the definition of assertiveness? And finally, what does a disco stand for? Answers to the quiz. What are the 3 types of less useful behaviours? Aggressive, passive, and passive-aggressive. Definitions of assertiveness are a way of behaving that makes sure you get attention and respect, and also a way of behaving that gives you the best chance of getting a positive outcome for yourself whilst maintaining a good working relationship with others. What does a DISCO stand for? A DISCO stands for adult to adult relationships, direct and honest but polite, the use of I statements, solution focused or solution oriented thinking, calmly expressing ourselves, and taking ownership of our own behaviour. So thank you very much for watching part 1 of Get Respect. Being assertive, getting more of what you want and need without being a jerk. And don't forget, send me your questions about assertiveness on Twitter @SteveWillSheep, and subscribe to the What Should I Think About podcast. New episodes drop every Monday.